Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name's Claire and this is Yoli. I make videos all about houseplant care, sharing tips and tricks I've learned over the years to help keep your plants happy and healthy. And in today's video, I'm going to take you through everything you need to know in order to care for an Anthurium Clarinervium plant. In case you hadn't guessed from behind me, I am slightly obsessed with this plant. I think it's just gorgeous. I absolutely adore it. And I've currently got 3 fairly big ones in my collection, along with a few little babies. So yes, I'm going to take you through everything you need to know about this plant in order to help it produce some really gorgeous mature growth, and also talk a bit about pollination and propagation as well. So yeah, I really hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. So the Anthurium Clarinervium is such a beautiful plant. It's got those gorgeous, gorgeous dark velvety leaves that are just, they're so dramatic, and I adore them so much. And I always say as well that this plant is absolutely fantastic if you're a beginner or you want something that's really low maintenance, really easy to care for, but you also want to add something a little bit rarer to your collection. So the first thing to think about with these plants straight off the bat is light. And these ones are actually fairly adaptable, a lot more adaptable than a lot of the other tropical plants in my collection. This big one behind me that you can see on the shelf there, that's been with me for, how long have I had that plant? About 3 years now, and it's lived in multiple different houses with me. It's dealt with all sorts of lighting conditions. Like, for example, the flat that I lived in before, it had pretty much no natural light and it still survived. But I think the important thing to mention is that when I say survived, it didn't give me any new growth for that period of time, but it still remains looking fairly healthy and fairly happy. So if you do only have a lower light or kind of medium to low light spot, this plant, it'll do okay, but it probably won't do as well as it would do if you were to up its light intake. Since I've moved here and I've been able to have my plants upstairs in the conservatory that gets pretty much all day natural light, they've given me so much new growth, because they can be very well known for being quite slow to grow, and I think honestly a lot of it does come down to their light intake. So if you're able to keep it in bright and direct light, then that is going to be the best possible thing. It's important to say as well, just make sure that they're not receiving too much direct sun, because direct sun can actually cause their leaves to burn. I've seen it happen before and it does not look nice. It just kind of scorches their leaves and they can't heal from that. So be very careful about direct sun. Here where I am in the UK, oh sorry, my knee's shaking, I might have to put it down. But here in the UK, gentle morning and evening sun is usually okay, because it's not quite so harsh and it's not as likely to damage their leaves. But as I say, midday sun is not good and it can damage them. So make sure you're keeping your plant out of that. Also, if you want your plant's growth to remain full and even, and I've actually got a very good example of this with this plant here. If you want it to remain even, then it's really important that you turn your plant regularly. So for example, this plant, although I don't mind the look of it because it usually just faces one way, as you can see if I turn it round, all of its leaves have just turned to face the light source. So rotating your plant on a regular basis is really important if you don't want it to look like that. It's also really important to make sure that you're keeping your plant's leaves clean, because if you don't, a buildup of dust and dirt is basically going to stop them from absorbing all the light they need in order to photosynthesize, grow healthily, look lovely and bushy and full. And for most plants, I would say using like a microfiber cloth or a damp sponge or something like that is absolutely fine. But because these are velvet leaved plants, they really don't like their leaves getting wet. So what I will do, I'll use a makeup brush or something like that, and I'll just kind of go over their leaves, give them a really thorough dust over, get into all the cracks and crevices, and that's how I clean their leaves. And when it comes to watering, the most common issues in this plant often stem from overwatering, which basically, overwatering just means watering your plant when it's not actually ready for a drink yet, and it can cause things like root rot, stem rot, lots of nasty things that can bring down your plants pretty quickly if you're not careful. So what I will always do with a pot size like this, I'll always make sure that the top few inches of soil have had enough time to completely dry out before I go ahead and rewater my plants again. I personally just stick my finger down into the soil and feel, but you can also get things called moisture meters for this if you don't trust your own judgment and you want to just make absolutely sure that you're not watering at the wrong time. As I've said in many of my other videos before, but if you're in any doubt, underwatering is always better than overwatering. And I always say that because from experience, it's always been so much easier to bring back a plant and get it to be healthy again if it's been underwatered as opposed to if it's been overwatered, because overwatering, as I say, it causes so many things that can be really hard to deal with. And I have lost plants to overwatering before as well. So if you're in any doubt, less is more. But when I say less is more, I definitely don't mean lightly water, if that makes any sense. What I'm trying to say, is basically when you do water your plant, make sure you're watering it when it's actually ready for a drink. So when those top few inches of soil are dry, and when you do water it, thoroughly soak it through. Like, I water my plants so much that I can see it absolutely pouring out of the drainage holes. It's actually wearing one of my old t-shirts at the moment because I didn't have a pot cover. But yeah, water it until you can see water pouring out of the drainage holes so that it's had a chance to completely soak all areas of the soil. And also on that note, if you do keep your plant in like a pretty ceramic pot or something like that, make sure you take it out when you water it so that the water isn't kind of collecting around the roots. Giving it drainage is so important, because if you don't, then again, a lot of the issues caused by overwatering can also affect this plant because its roots are essentially going to be sat in water. The other thing that you should be doing for this plant over the spring and summer months is fertilizing it, just because that is when it's at its peak time for growing, and it helps it to produce lots of beautiful new growth. It also helps to support any existing growth that's already there. But yes, fertilizing your plant is so important. I'm personally using a fertilizer called Liquid Gold Leaf at the moment, which I can get over here in the UK. I think they do ship around different parts of the world as well, but I'm not entirely sure. But that stuff is absolutely amazing, and it's keeping this plant really happy. The one thing that I will say is that if you've never fertilized a plant before, then I would personally recommend just easing them into it quite gently, as in starting with a little bit less than it says on the bottle and gradually building it up over time. I only say this because I've had a plant before that I had for I think about 3 years, and it was doing really well. I'd never fertilized it. I didn't even know what fertilizer was at this point, and then I got some fertilizer, added exactly how much it said on the bottle, gave it to my plant, and my plant went, oh my god, went into shock, and it didn't die, but it came very close. So yes, I would say if you're in any doubt, start with a little bit less and gradually build it up. When it comes to humidity for this plant, in my personal experience, these aren't a plant that require a huge amount. I personally always have my humidifier set to at least 65%, so I would say that's probably about minimum. You wouldn't want to go much below that because, again, things like browning tips, browning leaves, that can be caused by lack of humidity. But on the whole, these aren't ones, they're not like, for example, they're not like my calatheas that need ridiculous amounts of humidity. These ones seem to have coped fairly well in slightly lower levels, but yeah, I would say about 60, 65 is minimum. And as always, if you crank it up slightly higher, they are only going to thank you for it. One thing that you do have to be quite careful of is when you've got the central heating on. And I know my plant up here, I put it above a radiator a few years ago when I didn't really know a lot about what it liked and it didn't. And I don't know if you can see, I'll put a clip in, but it's got a little bit down here that's kind of browned a little bit because basically central heating and cooling systems in homes actually can drain so much of the natural humidity from the air. So if you have got the radiators on or anything like that, I would advise cranking up the humidity even more just to kind of counteract that and balance it a bit. When it comes to temperature for these plants, anywhere between 16 and 30 degrees Celsius is going to be absolutely fine for them. But as with the light, I've noticed dramatically that the growth in these plants has really kicked off when they've been in higher heat. When I had them in lower temperature conditions combined with obviously lower light, they were much slower growing. I kind of tend to use this as a rule of thumb for most of my tropical plants, but if you want to speed up their growth, obviously besides making sure their watering routine's right and their fertilizing is good, increasing the temperature, increasing the light and increasing the humidity is such a good way to boost growth. So when it comes to propagating these plants, there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. And the first one is just by dividing the plant. So as you can see here, this plant has started to give me another little plant in the soil, and it's really simple. You basically just take the plant out of the pot, break up the root system a little bit very carefully, and literally just divide it and then plant the new section up in a different pot, and voila, you will have a brand new plant. But then the second way, and I've spoken about this a little bit in another video, so I'll pop a clip in a minute, but the second way is through pollinating the plant, and that's how you get the berries in order to plant and turn into new little baby plants like I showed you at the beginning. And that is done through these things here, which are known as the inflorescence. I'll pop that clip in so you can see in more detail. And I know I've been saying for absolutely ages that I would talk about how you get the seeds for anthuriums to grow them from seed, so I thought I would quickly go through that. I've got two of my Clarinerviums here. So I did actually take a video of when I pollinated these ones recently, so I will show you that in a minute, but I'll very briefly explain. So you obviously need to wait for these things here to pop up, which are inflorescences, and I've actually got another one already coming up on this plant, just, oh, you can kind of see it just there. That's a new one coming up. But once they produce an inflorescence, they'll basically start in the female stage, and that's when you'll be able to see kind of droplets of sap. It's called stigmatic fluid, and that will be covering the spadex here, which is this bit, and that is when they are receptive, and that's when you can pollinate them. But if you don't have pollen to pollinate them, then unfortunately you're going to have to wait and probably store the pollen unless you've got 2 active plants, which luckily I did this time. I've never been that lucky before. But they usually stay in this female receptive stage from anywhere from about 4 days to a week in my experience. And as I say, if you've got pollen or you're able to pollinate them at that point, then that is great. But if you don't, after they've been in the female stage, you'll notice the stigmatic fluid won't be being produced anymore, and instead it will be producing pollen. And that is, if you want to pollinate in the future, what you should collect. I've actually got some that I collected in tinfoil just here, and again I'll insert a clip of how I did that. But if you do have 2 that are one in the female stage, one in the male stage at the same time, then you can essentially take the pollen from one, transfer it onto the other, and hopefully in a few months' time you will start to get some nice berries which you can then pick and plant and turn into new little anthuriums. It was really, really annoying with my ones. So basically, you want to choose quite a mature plant on the whole, because you want it to have a good energy reserves, because producing berries does take a lot of energy in the plants. And this one obviously is quite big, and this would have been the perfect one to pollinate, but annoyingly, and I've taken a risk here, this is the one that was in the female stage at the time that this one was in the male stage. So I could have just collected the pollen from both of them and saved it, but I took the risk and I have pollinated this plant, and it's only actually got 3 leaves at the moment. So I could risk doing some serious damage to this plant, but it was kind of more like a trial and error thing. I don't know if it's going to work. I did the pollination, I think about 3-4 weeks ago now, and I'm kind of kidding myself that I can see bulging already. I think it's too soon to tell, but I'll keep you updated with these. And as I say, I'll pop a clip in of me pollinating them to show you exactly how it's done, in case I didn't explain that well enough. So it's been a couple of months since I filmed that clip, and I can confirm that pollination has been successful. It hasn't died off, and it's starting to really, really bulge now, and I think it's well on its way to giving me some lovely new berries, which, as I say, I'll be able to pot up. Sphagnum moss tends to be the best way to pot them up at first, just for seed germination. And then, yes, hopefully I will have some lovely new plants. But yes, if anybody's got any questions, please do drop me a comment down below and I'll get back to you. But I really hope this video was useful. If it was, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, have a lovely day, and I will see you in the next video.